Before we jump into it today, I wanted to extend a quick invitation. If you've not yet joined us inside the podcast newsroom, you're going to want to. That is the place to get the answers to your most pressing podcast questions. Simply head over to thepodcastnewsroom.com, sign up for your private feed, and you will receive a link to submit your question to be answered in a future episode. Can't wait to see you. Again, thepodcastnewsroom.com. If I just keep showing up, eventually the right clients will find me. I know a lot of podcasters have felt this way, that if they just keep releasing episodes, one day it'll all work. But consistency alone does not equal sales. Strategy does. Showing up is not enough. We must show up strategically. And that's why you need to be building an asset. And that is what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to the More Profitable Podcast with Stacey Harris. I'm Stacey, and this is the spot to learn more about the strategies, tactics, and tools you need to build your more profitable podcast. My team and I work every day with podcasters like you to shift shows from frustrating time sucks to productive members of your sales team, because your show should be built to generate and convert leads. So let's get into it. Because you're here, I'm going to assume you're already on board to a certain extent, because you have to already see that just continuing to just keep pushing is not going to get you the result you want, is not going to get you the show you want, and is not ever going to deliver the conversions you want. And I think it gets really dangerous because in the content space in general, podcasting, blogging, video, social media, short form stuff even, there's this phrase of consistency being so critical. There's this belief that consistency above all else, when in reality, quality matters. Not just when we think about providing high quality content to our listener, but in getting the result we want from our show. We often talk about knowing why. Why do we podcast? But when we talk about that, we talk about that in the context of like impact. It's almost this like aspirational ego trip of like, I'm going to change people's lives with my program. When in reality, for sustainability to be a factor, which has to be considered when we're thinking about consistency, we have to be getting some kind of reward. There has to be some level of that why that is about us. And for the podcasts that I produce for this show, that why is a business impact. It is the role this show fits into in my business. This podcast, and I don't think this is going to be news to you, but this podcast to me is a salesperson. It's a marketing person. It is a person who goes out and builds relationships with potential clients so that when they're ready to come in and learn more, I have a jumping off point with them. That's the job of this show. As if it were a person, that is the role that this show fills. It's in sales and marketing. And that means that I need to not just produce something, anything, but I need to be creating something that executes the job duties of this role, of this sales and marketing role. And so the consistency becomes less about just getting something out and instead producing an asset that has the right kind of impact. Not just allowing my listener to feel seen or heard, not just allowing my listener to have a better understanding of how to do something or what they may want, but to move them through a decision-making process, keeping in mind that sometimes that decision is no, and that's a win too. We've all had those clients that were like, man, I really wish my content would have pushed them off, would have shaken this one loose, because it was not the best fit. We've all worked with that client. That's the job. That's part of the decision making. The decision may be no. We hope the decision is yes, but we only hope the decision is yes for those right fit. And that's where your consistency comes in. This is why when I sit down with clients to build strategies, be it in a production quarterly call or in our podcast strategy intensive, I'm not just talking about a content plan. I'm talking about a sales plan we're delivering via content. I don't want you to be a content creator. I don't want you to be an influencer. I want you to be a business owner who is using content strategically. And by the way, your favorite influencer, your favorite content creator, the ones with hundreds of thousands or millions of followers, they're doing this too. They are business owners using content strategically. That's how they get brand partnerships. They're in meetings with the brands they're working with, strategically planning what they're going to say and when they're going to say it and what kind of content is going out. They're building this same stuff because they understand that they are not just content creators. They are businesses using content strategically. And you need to be doing that too, because content creators work for the platforms. Business owners work for themselves. They are working inside of the platforms, but they are not working for the platforms. The folks who are out there screaming about algorithms, that are out there getting fired up about platforms changing, the rules here and there, they're the ones chasing the algorithms and dependent on the algorithms. Those of us who are working for ourselves and are working inside of these tools, we stay focused on our audience. We stay focused on our messaging. We stay focused on how we deliver what we deliver. Does that mean we don't make ebbs and flows as trends change, as buyer psychology, shifts, as the needs of our audience shifts? As these platforms change rules and features, we may even have things we need to respond to, but we're not revolutionizing. We're creating evolutions inside of our own strategy. We are not chasing. That's the difference. I want you to be proactive in your content, not reactive in your content. That's the difference. All right. Before we dig into this, I want to remind you, if you have questions as we're going through this conversation today, a great place to leave them for me is uncommonlymore.com/AMA. All of those questions get answered inside of our private podcast, the podcast newsroom. Make sure you are signed up over at thepodcastnewsroom.com. The piece here that I think is so distracting when it comes to generating real sales is we come back to this consistency, right? We started today's conversation with the idea of if I just keep showing up, the right clients will find me. And we focus so much on the consistency of yes or no, of box checked or box left unchecked, of delivering the episode or not delivering the episode, that we forget that that's not actually the consistency that matters most. Now, it absolutely is a factor. It is a whole lot easier to do all of the things we're going to do when you have a consistent episode going out. But putting out an episode consistently with inconsistent messaging, with inconsistent tone for an inconsistent listener, meaning it's unclear who you're talking to episode, as far as where they are in their buyer readiness journey, as far as who the ideal client is at all, as far as what the offer is at all. That inconsistency is so much more detrimental than just not showing up. I would rather you be showing up inconsistently with a high quality and consistent message than showing up each and every week, but I'm never sure what show I'm going to get. Because the fact of the matter is you're not building the consistency that matters most, which is consumption. When we show up week after week and deliver what is expected by our listener, they'll keep showing up week after week. This is where we start to become a trusted resource. That's the kind of consistency you want. And that consistency does not come from it being Monday and you know your episode's going to go out Tuesday, and so you sit down and record. It comes from knowing what you're talking about and knowing why you're talking about it. This is the strategic foundation that builds you an evergreen sales tool because you are consistently working back from the same place. You're consistently moving towards the same destination. Does this mean you talk about the same thing all the time? No. Does it mean you're going to repeat yourself? Yeah, it does. You're going to. I do all the time. And you know I do. You've heard it. But that is consistency. Repetition is consistency. And I don't want to talk about the idea that you need to show up weekly as completely inconsequential because it matters. Something like pod fade kills authority. When you just disappear for weeks or months or years at a time, and yes, I've had clients sit down with me for podcast strategy intensives that fall into all three of those pod fade categories, you lose trust. You become unreliable. Because I was told you were going to be here every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever it is, and it turns out you're not. That consistency is important. However, it becomes less impactful if it's not paired with that consistency of your messaging. Because if you show up every week, but I'm never quite sure what you're going to deliver, that same distrust is bred. That same lack of reliability is felt. Repetition is what builds brands. There's a reason you remember the Big Mac jingle from when we were kids. That's right, I paused so you could finish singing it in your head. There's a reason that every 40 to 45-year-old I know can sing the entirety of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air jingle, like intro, because we heard it consistently. Because we heard it over and over again, and because it was built to stay with us. The other one I think of all the time is the Cars for Kids commercial. I don't know if you guys have that other places. We have it here on the one West Coast, the 1-800 Cars for Kids commercial. It's like a group of, it's like a kid band. Here's the reality. Those children are like 40 plus now. But we've all been watching that commercial since we were kids. We've all heard that jingle on the radio since we were kids. That's why it works. So when you can let go of this fear that repeating yourself, which by the way is not going to be anywhere near as extreme as the Cars for Kids commercial that you will now have on repeat in your brain, or the Big Mac song that you will now have on repeat in your brain, is because we're talking about consistency, not repetition. And I think too often as experts, we're so afraid of repeating ourselves. We're so afraid of repeating the same thing over and over. But that's what works. That's what building a brand is. And so I want to encourage you to build this repetition into your process. This is one of the reasons that I've got clients who sit down with me for podcast strategy intensives each and every quarter. We have intensive clients who sit down with me twice a year, and we sit down and we do this work repetitively. You want to know what happens when you do this work consistently and repetitively? Your output becomes consistent. Your output becomes repetitive in a good way. You establish expectation. You establish consistency. You become a trusted resource I know I can go to. And if you're delivering for that for me as a lead, I can't wait to see what you deliver as a client. This is why our strategy work is set up the way it is so that we can come together every 12 weeks, look ahead at what's next, and build out that process. And that's what I want to start talking about now, because the consistency of aligning our offers and our content can't just be something we do when it comes time to launch. And I think it gets muddy because too often those folks who have very much so a launch model where I open the doors to this program 2 times a year, and that's when I'm really in sales mode, there's a belief that that's the only time they need to be creating sales asset content. But because they don't create sales asset content outside of that launch window, that content is inconsistent. That content is irregular. And so it feels disruptive. And instead of further building trust and moving someone into that sales cycle, they feel disrupted. And frankly, they feel sold to. They feel like you just lulled me in so that you could pitch me. It's like when you go I have these weird examples today. But it's like when I don't even know if they do these anymore. But do you remember like those timeshare like weekend things they did? I think they did like in the 90s, early 2000s. Genuinely have no idea if they still do these. But you would go for a weekend and you'd stay at this resort and they'd have to do like while you were there, you'd have to sit down and do like a sales meeting with them trying to sell you this timeshare that you're never going to buy. Although people must, right? Because they keep doing it or they kept doing it for a long time. But that's what this feels like to your listener is you pulled me in with your resort and now it's time for our timeshare presentation. And if I just sit through this, eventually the thing I want will start again. That's not the energy we want to have with your launch content. And so we have to be balancing that launch content with evergreen assets. Even if we're not selling anything evergreen, let's say that nothing in your business is available for purchase on demand. It's only inside of these launch windows. You are still responsible for selling with your evergreen content. Instead of selling your offer, you're selling your email list. You're selling a workshop. You're selling the content inside the episode. You are selling getting them into your DMs, following you on Instagram, connecting with you on TikTok, whatever it is. You're selling them something, even if the thing you get in return is not financial. And so, regardless of whether you have a launch model or an evergreen model more similar to mine, where you're selling stuff all the time, the asset building has to be evergreen. You need both for either to be effective. Most podcasters, most business owners, they're only focusing on one or the other. I want you to be doing it differently. And so, what does that look like? Well, when I sit down with clients in podcast strategy intensives, this is where we start. What are you selling? Who are you selling it to? And how are we selling it? I know you have heard these 3 questions because I ask you them all the time. But this is where the consistency is built from. This is where the assets are built from. Because we go through what are we selling, who are we selling it to, and how are we selling it so that we can reverse engineer our content. We need to look at what does our audience need to know? What do they need to believe? How do they need to feel? What do they need to understand before they're ready to buy? That's your content plan. More importantly, that is your sales plan delivered via content. And remember, that's what we're building is a sales plan driven by content, not just a content plan, because we want to be building towards a destination. We're not just accumulating listeners like they're Pokemon cards. We want to be moving people towards something. We want to be moving people towards actually working with you. And that's why we start every one of these calls with what are you selling? Who are you selling it to? And how are you selling it to them? Because that content plan, that sales plan is derived by the answers to those questions. It doesn't have to be complicated. You've heard me talk to clients on this show. We had Nicole Achion, and we talked about her podcast and the impact it's had on her business. Very early, she's just coming up on her 1 year in this show, and she's already seen huge results. In fact, we've got to have her on the show again because she's had even more amazing stuff happen. And she's somebody who very much so has a launch model. But guess what? We create evergreen assets so that when her launch content comes out, it works. And I can't even tell you how well it's working right now. I'm stoked to see how it's working for her. The same is true in my own business. And this is why I love evergreen assets, because our most recent production client, the client who signed with us most recently, does not follow me on social media. Well, she does now. Did not follow me on social media. Had never seen a Instagram story, an Instagram post, a thread, a TikTok, a Facebook post. I haven't posted on Facebook in years, but a LinkedIn message, nothing. She Googled something. She found my show because the show is built, that's right, to show up to answer those questions. My show notes are optimized for SEO. So she found an episode that was like a year or two old. In that episode, went and bought a program that was open at the time that is not open right now, but it is our Profitable Podcaster Mastermind. Bought that, then booked a call with me. And on that call, we moved her into the package she is in now, which is a full production package with us. She had never talked to me before she invested with me. No social media, no email list, nothing. She purchased based on listening to a show she found via Google, then booked a call with me. We had a conversation. I think the third sentence out of her mouth was, "I think I want more." And in under 30 minutes, we had a production contract signed and we were onboarding her. This is proof that when you build a podcast that is aligned with your sales strategy, that answers the questions your buyers need answered before they buy, it builds buyers. It doesn't buy awareness. It builds buyers. And that's what I want your show to be doing. This is what we do in a podcast strategy intensive, is we build shows that do this. Let's do this for your show. Let's build a show that you know is a sales asset, not just a content channel. If you're listening to this and you're thinking, I need this level of strategy, I want this kind of outcome, I want to build buyers, I want to sit down and I want to do that with you. Head on over to uncommonlymore.com/intensive. Grab your spot and let's get you moving. Let's build out a show that consistently delivers a sales asset that moves your leads in the direction of buying, that helps them understand how to know when is the right time, how to know if they're the right fit, how to know if you're the solution they need. Let's build that asset for you, okay? uncommonlymore.com/intensive is where you're going to go. I cannot wait to sit down and build your podcast strategy with you. I will see you right back here next week. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Remember that content consumption does not make changes. So commit to doing something from today's episode. Maybe it's taking action on what we talked about. Maybe it's reaching out to me and learning more about podcast strategy intensives, or what podcast production looks like with our team. All of that is over at uncommonlymore.com. And if you haven't yet signed up for the podcast newsroom, I want to remind you that is a great next step. If you're not really sure what comes next, hang out over there. Get those exclusive private episodes. That's over at podcastnewsroom.com. And the last favor I will ask, because social proof is endlessly important for sure, is to leave a rating or review for the show. If you go to ratethispodcast.com/more, that's the easiest way to do it. But I would love to hear what you thought of the show, what you think of the show, and if the show has been helpful for you. I can't wait to chat with you. So this is just the start of the conversation. Reach out so we can keep it going. Talk soon.